work at NICE. Sorry, just got interrupted by the robot voice there. Yeah, my name is Nick Baillie, and I work at the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK, NICE. But today I'm kind of chairing this session in my role as interim chair of INSIA, the International Network for Social Intervention Assessment. This is the first webinar that's being hosted by INSIA, actually, and we hope it will be the first of many that where we can kind of bring some really interesting topics for discussion, because we want, I mean, the aim of the network is to promote the use of evidence in social care, and promote the methods and use of systematic reviews. So we hope we can bring some really interesting debates in that field to you, and engage with a wide audience on that topic. So this is the first webinar, as I said. The devil is in the details, where we want to examine and have a look at some approaches to literature searching, the risk of bias, and present a case study that's been discussed in some journal articles recently. I'm going to pick out a couple of colleagues on the call and ask them to introduce themselves, just to test the sounds working. But just in terms of any kind of other administrative things today, we're going to run through the session, and then hopefully we're going to have some time at the end for some questions and discussion. That will be facilitated by using the raise hand function. So please do take the time while we're talking to work out where that button is across your toolbar across the bottom of the screen. I know sometimes flicking between Teams and Zooms and things, you lose track of where your hand is. So take your time to find that. Just in terms of the people that I would like to introduce themselves, first of all, Tina is going to kick off with some of the discussion. So do you just want to introduce yourself, Tina, and then we'll move on to Carl and Knut and ask them to introduce themselves as well. Okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tina Olsson, and I am Associate Professor of Social Work. I'm affiliated with both the University of Gothenburg's Department of Social Work and Jönköping University's School of Health and Welfare. Is there anything else you'd like me to say, Nick, or does that do the trick?
No, that's great, and the sound's working perfectly. So Knut and then Carl.
I'm Knut Sundell. I'm working at the SBU, and I'm a senior advisor for social affairs, as well as associate professor in psychology. And I'm also one of the co-authors of our articles we will discuss today.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Gornitzki. I'm an information specialist also at SBU as Knut, and I'm also the coordinator for the INSIA Information Retrieval Working Group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then and so Tina, Knut and Carl have been involved in the particular case we're going to discuss, but then there's a couple of people that I know are kind of thinking about a response and some questions and issues to raise at the end. So Rigmor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Rigmor Berg. I work at the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, and I've been involved with systematic reviews for about 15 years, particularly in the social welfare area. And I'm co-chair of INSIA.
Okay, thank you all. So that was a great sound test. Thank you to the people that have introduced themselves, are going to make lead some of the discussion today. So I'm now going to hand over to Tina, who's going to kick off the discussion.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen here. See if I get it right. So hopefully, do you all see? Oh, this is probably the wrong. Let me. What do you see?
We can't see your presentation anymore, Tina.
Let's see.
You navigate to the first slide and then do the share screen. Yeah.
Right. So is this something that
Perfect.
looks good?
Yeah, perfect.
You would think I would understand by now how to make it happen, but so it is. So just as a little background to our discussion today, we'll talk about primarily, I think, a reply that we had to a comment on our systematic review that is called "The Devil's in the Details: Unpacking the Systematic in Systematic Reviews." And this, again, is hosted by INSIA. So as by way of background, in 2020, I was involved with about 9 other people in a systematic review and meta-analysis of non-institutional interventions for youth aged 12 to 17 to prevent juvenile criminal recidivism. That review was undertaken by SBU, the Swedish Agency for Health Technology Assessment and Assessment of Social Services. And we published that in 2020 in Swedish. And just briefly, our main result was, of the 17 identified interventions that were included in the review, we did not find that any one intervention was more effective than the control conditions in reducing future criminality for youth that had a previous criminal history. In 2021, we published this same review in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology in English. And then shortly thereafter, a commentary on our review was published, and we again replied to that commentary. So it's this discussion that we're going to talk about here today. By way of method, our PICO, which is Population Intervention Control and Outcome, we were interested in studies that looked at adolescents between 12 and 17 years of age who had previously engaged in at least one crime. And this previously engagement in at least one crime is what made our systematic review stand out from some prior reviews that did not have previous criminal activity as part of the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Another thing we looked at that was a little bit different was we looked only at interventions that were provided to youth and or their families while the youth remained in the community. So we were not interested in interventions that were provided while youth were incarcerated or institutionalized or detained in any way. We included studies that had a no intervention control. So for example, a waitlist control. And we also included studies that used treatment as usual or another intervention as the control. And we were interested in officially reported crimes, which included arrest or convictions or self-reported crimes. We published a protocol, so if you're interested, you can take a look at that. We followed the methodology proposed by Cochrane and Campbell with a little bit of a difference, which has to do with our assessment of risk of bias and how we handled studies that we assessed as having a high risk of bias. We used grade, and we included interventions or studies that were published in English, Swedish, Danish, or Norwegian. The brief comment was interested in looking at one area of interventions that was included in our review, and this group of interventions were mentoring interventions. And what the author did in their comment was they expanded the search to include additional databases that we did not include in our search. And 5 additional studies, according to the author, were found that met our inclusion criteria. When these studies were analyzed together with the mentoring interventions that we found, there was a more positive outcome as relates to the effects of mentoring services. DuBois concluded that the literature search should be as extensive and multifaceted as possible, and the search for gray or fugitive literature that does not appear in academic journals should be undertaken also, and that researchers should include contacting active researchers in the area, as they are most likely to be aware of misstudies. They also argued that the potential negative consequences of misstudies might have large effects for those affected, and that there might be more fugitive studies due to publication bias or studies that don't get published. So there are likely many studies out there that are not included if we don't actively look for gray literature. So before we go on to our reply, we can just say that, you know, it's really positive from my perspective, at least, that these kinds of methodological questions are raised, especially by researchers that are versed in the method, because I think it's easy for maybe researchers not versed in the method to have questions and maybe criticisms, but when there are colleagues that are versed in the methods, it allows for a rich discussion and kind of a reflection about how we conduct our own research that can only help us produce better research in the future. So we just want to take the time to say thank you for initiating this discussion. With that, we did have a few responses. And these responses kind of rest on the idea that, yes, the literature search is an important part of a systematic review, but there are other aspects of systematic review that are just as important. And we also need to, in addition to being systematic and extensive with our literature review, we also need to be systematic in how we assess the evidence. And we also have to take care in how we combine studies. So our first question that maybe we can discuss a little bit after this is, what is considered extensive and exhaustive when it comes to systematic review? And with that, you know, you can never be sure that you found all articles. You can only be sure that some articles are missed. So what is important for us to take into consideration when we're talking about literature search, and what is good enough? Our literature search included 10 databases for original articles and 8 databases for systematic reviews. We searched named interventions. We searched 10 web pages, and we scanned the reference lists of all identified published reviews and eligible studies. So all in all, we looked at or reviewed 16,628 articles. We did not contact active researchers in the area of interest. And we did not search the 2 databases that DuBois searched for his comment, which was the National Institute of Justice and the National Mentoring Resource Center. And just in addition to that, there were many other, for sure, possible organizations and web pages that we did not consult. The second issue has to do with, you know, once we find studies, how do we critically assess them and appraise them, and how do we make the determination as to whether they are included in our final analysis or not? We used Cochrane's risk of bias 2 when we assessed the records that came into our review. And in our review, we excluded studies that were assessed as having high risk of bias by our reviewers. In in looking at the 5 articles that DuBois lifted in his comment, we actually found that 3 of those studies we did find in our literature review, but we had excluded those 3 studies. And that has to do with how independent reviewers assessed risk of bias and inclusion and exclusion criteria. We did not go back after DuBois' comment and reevaluate our assessments. But when we look at a couple of the studies, we see that one of the studies that DuBois found that we did not find, Durez, did not meet our inclusion criteria. So in that study, the population was provided the mentoring service while youth were detained. So it did not meet our criteria of being a community-based intervention. And then when we looked at Wainwrath, which was also one of the 2 that we did not find in our review, we likely would have excluded this study because there was a very high attrition rate, 51% in the experimental group and 39% in the control group. So the third question we raised in our reply was, when are interventions comparable? And we take up this idea of lumping or splitting. And in relation to DuBois, our systematic review, admittedly takes a more of a splitting approach. We took a lot of care in lumping interventions together as being similar, and erred on the side of splitting interventions. So one thought is, when do we combine study findings? When are they similar enough in order to be combined? And if we just take some examples from the studies that DuBois found, one study by Philip Smith described the Adolescent Diversion Project. And in the text to this article, the term mentoring was not mentioned one time in the entire piece. Geis et al. From 2015, which was the study that DuBois included in his comment, evaluated the girls program. And here the girls program was described as a structured support program and not a mentoring program. Mentoring was mentioned briefly in the background to the study, but when describing the girls program, there were a number of components listed: structured support, group discussions, skill building, but not mentoring. And then another example is where authors described their intervention as both a mentorship program and a diversion program. So here, this just lifts the idea that as a reviewer and as a researcher, we're always kind of faced with this idea of having to make a decision. And here, we didn't have this study included in our review, but the question can be raised: would we have included this and lumped this together with the other mentorship programs, which were very clearly in our review described as mentorship programs in the title, the abstract, and the text to the study? So in summary, we kind of concluded that, yeah, we failed to find 2 studies that DuBois found in his additional search. And these studies were Durez and Geis. And we did not look at them in any detail. We did not do any kind of risk of bias assessment, but we concluded that had we had found Durez, we likely would have excluded it because the youth were still detained while they were provided the mentorship program. And had we found Geis, we likely would have excluded it due to high risk of bias. When it comes to Geis, even if we would have included it, had we have done a risk of bias assessment and found it to have low to medium risk, we likely would not have lumped it together with the other mentorship programs because Geis did not describe their program as a mentorship program in the text to their study. So that's a quick background. I I don't know if we've sent out those, the articles, but no. They're all published in Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology. So if you're interested, it would be interesting to read.
I'll just say that I got an email from Sean Grant, who mixed up the times, and perhaps he can join. So Emma, could you send the Zoom link to him? Let's see if it comes.
Yeah, I will send it to him.
Okay, that's the one of the dangers of organizing international events, isn't it? The getting the time zones mixed up. Okay, thank you for that, Tina. Can I just check with Knut or Carl whether you wanted to add anything to what Tina had said at this point before I ask Rigmor? She'd like to say a few words.
No, I have nothing to add.
No, nothing. I can put the links to the articles in the chat.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be very helpful. Okay. Okay, thank you. So Rigmor, what can I ask you kind of what you kind of made of this then, and then to give a bit of a view?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I did read the original article, the commentary, and the response to the commentary, all really interesting. So and quite educational as well. And as a methodologist, it was particularly interesting from that point of view. And I noted particularly the search aspect of this particular review, and made perhaps 5 observations that I'd like to comment on. So taking as a starting point the Messier standards, which is likely the most authoritative standard for systematic reviews, and the PRISMA reporting standards also. When I evaluate the search in the Olsson et al. Review with these standards in mind, and especially the Messier standards C24 to 38, I find that all mandatory and highly desirable standards are met by the Olsson et al., except for C27 and 38. No, 31, excuse me, which are searching trials registers and contacting relevant individuals and organizations. And as observed by DuBois, and I think commented also now by Tina, it could have been useful to search and or contact individuals and organizations. I'm skeptical, and I'm not sure how useful it would have been to follow the Messier standard on searching trials registers for this particular review, but potentially. But anyway, looking at the Messier standards, the search looks exceedingly thorough. I'm also mindful that with regard to searching, the Cochrane Handbook, Chapter 4, and by extension, the Messier standards state that, and I quote, "Searching for studies should be as extensive as possible in order to reduce the risk of publication bias and to identify as much relevant evidence as possible." So it says, again, extensive as possible in order to reduce the risk. So it doesn't say eliminate the risk, because as has been commented here, it's impossible to know if you missed anything until you find that you have missed something. And the handbook also states that time and budget restraints require the review team to balance the thoroughness of the search with efficiency in the use of time and funds. And I think for all of us who are engaged in reviews, that is a very real situation. We have to balance the thoroughness of the search with our time use. And my third point is that quite a few studies and other work, many of which we can read about in the Cochrane Handbook, they address issues around identifying unpublished studies, and And it seems to be a consensus, as is stated in the handbook, that there is no easy and reliable single way to obtain information about studies that have been completed but never published. It's a very difficult task for even very experienced search specialists. For example, there's one study that focused on the contribution of unpublished studies, including dissertations and studies in languages other than English, to results of meta-analyses in reviews about children. It's by a research group led by Lisa Hartling from 2017, and they found that unpublished studies and studies in languages other than English rarely had any impact on the results and conclusions of the review. And some other studies have found that asking researchers for information about completed but never published studies has sometimes been fruitful, and other studies have found that it's not very fruitful. And my fourth point, I guess, is this. It's the same point that both Olsson et al. And DuBois raise. So when to stop searching. And again, I looked in the Cochrane Handbook, and there is a particular section on the Cochrane Handbook on this particular question. And it says there that developing a search is often an iterative and exploratory process. And it's often difficult to decide in a scientific or objective way when a search is complete and search strategy development can stop. The ability to decide when to stop typically develops through experience of developing many strategies. And over the years, there's been many attempts to investigate this, and there are some suggestions for stopping rules, as well as other methods to assist us in when to decide when to stop developing the search, but there's little formal evaluation of such approaches. So we simply don't quite know yet. And my very last point is, and it hopefully ends on a more positive note than my other comments, that as far as I can ascertain from talking to the search strategist at the Institute of Public Health, there's a rapid development of new methods of identifying studies, published and unpublished studies, such as OpenAlex. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Nick, but my understanding is that NICE used OpenAlex exclusively for identifying studies related to COVID. There's also elicit.org and these kinds of developments when it comes to searching and identifying both published and unpublished studies offer hope for reducing the risk of publication bias in systematic reviews. And I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Rigmor. Some kind of really well thought through points there, and you've kind of obviously taken a lot of time to think about the issues that this has raised. I might have spotted a couple of my information specialist colleagues on the call here, so I might come back to one of them shortly about that question about OpenAlex. But Tina or Knut or Carl, did you want to kind of respond again to the points that Rigmor's made, or kind of pick up on anything that she's highlighted? I think that was your hand going up briefly then, Knut.
Yeah, and it disappeared, but I can talk anyway. Very nice presentation, Rigmor. And as I read you, you never know if you're perfect or if you have missed a lot of trials. And it's, you know, for me, the major thing here is transparency. That's the only way, that's the key thing, that you're transparent with how you did it and what you included and what you didn't include, because then, like DuBois then can comment and try to make a difference by doing their own systematic review. No, meta-analysis, I mean. We all know that In the beginning of the millennia, multisystemic therapy was considered the only one, or at least the most effective intervention when it comes to juvenile delinquency, etc. And then Julia Littell did a systematic review where she included grey literature, and that was the best and the largest study. It was a Canadian study. And by including that, the results were turned, and the conclusion, according to Julia Littell, was that there's no proof of any effect for MST. This result has then been replicated in Sweden, in Netherlands, if I'm not wrong, in UK, but contrary to the Norwegian results. And so the question is still out there: is it more effective or not? But it exemplifies the need for including grey literature. I'm involved in a systematic review now on gang criminality, and one of the leading researchers called Tony Braga, he did a review that was published in Campo, well, some years ago. And what he did was that he actually sent a letter to the 100 most influential researchers when it comes to gang crime, to ask if they had missed any of the trials. And I don't know exactly where they found the trials, but it was at least 24 articles. And out of those 24, 1/3 was grey literature. But if you check on the effect size, I actually calculated that yesterday to see of the grey literature versus the published, and there were virtually no significant difference, and almost no difference at all in effect sizes among those two groups. So if I also read you right, Rigmor, the question is still out there. We don't know if it makes a big difference or not when it comes to grey literature. Thanks.
If I may comment on that, yeah, I think that's the situation, and probably it varies quite a bit across disciplines or across questions. So I think it has to be a consideration that's taken by the review team very early in the process, how carefully to search for potentially unpublished studies, because in some fields it might make quite a big of a difference, and in others I don't think it makes a big of a difference. So at least, just have a conscientious idea about it throughout the review process, preferably already from the early stages.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Knut. I mean, Tina, is there anything that had prompted for you? Any thoughts any additional thoughts that's given you reflections?
No, I mean, it was actually nice to hear. I mean, it was actually nice to have an outside perspective on the work that we've done, because I think that, method is one area where we can always improve, and it's easy to maybe not like the results of a study. But if the method is sound, we can be more secure in our results. So it was actually nice to hear that, I think what I take from it is, as far as we can say, is we did a pretty good job. We could have done a little bit better job maybe, but all in all, we're following the methodological advice that's out there. And I think, as Knut said, what seems most important is that we are transparent, and open up our method for, well, maybe not for criticism, but also for development. DuBois could go out and find 5 additional studies and say, I want these studies in an analysis, and maybe that works for his purposes, even if I maybe don't agree with the idea that he followed our method, because we don't see some things, we don't see a flow chart, and we don't see any information about independent reviewers and risk of bias assessments and these kinds of things. But I like the idea of our science being able to be cumulative. And now that we've done this large piece of work, other investigators can come and add on to that work. So all in all, I think it's positive comments that you've had, Rigmor. Thank you.
Knut, are you coming in?
Yeah, another thought. Those two organizations where the 5 articles come from are American. And of course, America is a large country when it comes to research, etc., etc. But the research throughout the world, I would say, is increasing. So you have to actually have a really good knowledge on organizations that might have published articles throughout the world. So you can't just restrict it to US or Europe or Australia, but also other countries like China and whatever it is. So it's a big problem to really scan everywhere to see what's there. And then my main thing, which I thought about now, is that if you devote so much work for finding another 1 or 2 or 3 articles, it has also a consequence, because you can't do other research as much as you would if you have to search for grey literature in this extent, because the time then could have been used for other reviews. And I must say that I think the speciality of literature search at SBU is actually not the grey literature. Or Carl, would you contradict me to that?
Well, I think this is a topic with grey literature we always discuss a lot, but my thought here was rather that, of course, we can say that we do a complementary search for grey literature, but it's very hard to say that you're exhaustive or even systematic when it comes to grey literature, because, of course, in general, most of the grey literature is not available in specific databases. You have to check specific websites, etc. And that is hard to do in a systematic way or reproducible way. And also when to stop searching for grey literature. I mean, I think you can say stop searching when it comes to the traditional scientific databases, when you feel that you have made an exhaustive and very comprehensive search strategy. But how do you say that when it comes to grey literature? It's more like, you check some important websites and you get some suggestions for the subject specialists in the project teams. But it's hard to know when you're to do an exhaustive search for grey literature. And that would be a very big challenge for us as information specialists, because it's very time consuming. And as Knut says, then you have to balance this to other projects you can spend your time on. So that was a few thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Carl. I can see Tina's got her hand up again, but just before Tina comes in, just a comment to everyone that is on the call. I mean, if you do want to make a comment or share a similar experience, please do raise your hand and we'll come to you. If you don't want to kind of raise it that way, do put something in the chat and I will try and keep an eye on it. You will note that Carl has put links to the articles in there, so yeah, please do take part in the discussion. So Tina.
Yeah, I just was thinking about this idea of when to stop. I like this, Rigmor, with stopping rules. I'd like to learn a little bit more about that, because, stopping, I think if I think back, I think we were about, I don't remember exactly, but I think we were about 10 investigators on this project. And we did this review over a period of, I think, about a year. And there is also this idea of the search becomes old, and you can do your search and then do your analyses, and all of a sudden you've spent half a year, assessing and analyzing, and then all of a sudden we have to do a new search because so much time has gone by. So at some point there is, like, pragmatically, you have to stop. So I think this idea of kind of stop rules or yeah, when do you say now enough is enough and we're happy with this the way it is? That is quite fuzzy.
Yeah, it's a very subjective subjective question and issue, isn't it? And one that I'm sure debate will go on and on and on. As Marion, have you got an answer to this, or is it another question?
I don't have an answer to it, and it's really interesting to hear colleagues from other countries grappling with the same issue. So hi Tina, I'm Marion Spring. I'm the Associate Director of Information Services at NICE. I have a big team of about 35 information specialists. I can see that lots of them are here as well, and this is one of the things we grapple with as well. So really interesting to hear this conversation. And also, you know, what do you do when someone's told you that you've missed a study? We can't see the papers, they're behind a paywall, and we don't have access to these particular titles. So what I can't see are the databases that you search. It looks like you did a really big extensive search, but what I can't see, because the assessment we've heard from Rigmor has taken a very clinical approach. He's obviously recognized that, you know, clinical trials are not useful, but for this particular topic I can't see which databases you searched and whether there's another way there, rather than thinking about when do we stop, actually how much effort do we need to invest in those really early stages that are, you know, when you look at things like, you know, Cochrane and CRD, they're taken as like the holy grail things that you'll do as part of a search. But actually for some topics, maybe you are better off investing in searching for grey literature or those, you know, those unique databases, and not, you know, your bog standard clinically focused databases. So that's my question.
Oh, was that okay?
Yeah, sorry.
Which databases exactly? Yeah. I don't know. Carl, should I take that, or do you want to take that? Or
you can start. You can start. I was fiddling with the articles here, trying to find.
And I guess linked to that, what's your view on, you know, if you're thinking about stopping searching, what is your view about, you know, shifting your resource investment to different parts of that search process?
But as I should just say, as Tina said, I mean, this should be seen in comparison to the resources and how long a project should continue, because we all need try to be more effective and work faster and publish more, etc. And then you can't just start exploring too much grey literature at the same time. So my thought was that I think this is a typical good example when somebody makes a comment for a systematic review, and the post-publication peer review, you can call it, that there could be a conversation about a review after it is published. That is something that should be more, hopefully more common, because there's so many systematic reviews out there that nobody even read, I would say, or make comments or etc. So, but Tina, you would like to continue perhaps?
Well, I mean, I think for sure there's this idea of capturing as many studies, as many relevant studies as possible. Like that's the goal, I would think. And then I think the determination has to be made, okay, well, what's the likelihood that I will find additional interesting studies? You know, now that we've looked at 16,600 studies, what's the likelihood that one more search of a database will give me? Are those resources enough to, if I find one more study or two more studies, or what's the payoff versus the effort? And I think this is like a tricky, it's tricky. You know, I was involved in another review, and was told that there's some kind of magic number. You have to have X number of hits in order to make it an interesting systematic review. And that was something that I had never heard before. Yeah. I see your smiley, laughy faces. So yeah. So what is the magic number of hits, and how many reference articles do we need to find in our search in order to feel like, okay, our search strings are good? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I mean, yeah, I can send you the number. It's secret, but no. But when it comes to grey literature, you don't know the number really. I mean, in the same way, when you do a structured search for the traditional articles in scientific databases, but when you search very unsystematic at different sites or web pages, etc., it's not systematic anymore. So it's not that. Yeah, you can't really say a number. I guess it depends on. It's very topic dependent. So you're very dependent on the experts in the fields that know the different organizations, etc. So, and of course, I should just say that this is, of course, an important topic for us in the INSIA Information Retrieval Working Group, because I guess this topic for us information specialists who are searching the medical or health sciences, this is not that a big topic. Well, it is a topic, of course, with grey literature, but not that big as within the social care field, for instance, as in this case for this article today.
Oh yeah, I can see a few hands up. I think it was Rigmor first, and then Knut.
Okay, great. I'll be quick. And I think perhaps Carl stole my point, but yeah, I completely agree with Carl that since this is an INSIA event, it behooves us to remember that a lot of the recommendations and the guidance that is on searching is in the more medical health field. So for example, the Messier standards that I refer to, it's Cochrane reviews, and it's much closer to health than it is to social and welfare care topics. We have a lot still that we need to develop in terms of searching and other methods developments in the social care area, where it's more unexplored, I think, than it is in the medical health area.
Knut?
Is it okay if I raise another issue, since I see the clock is ticking very fast? And
Yeah.
that's about evidence synthesis. So, which is a question which is really complicated. When are two interventions, two trials, enough similar? Do they describe the same intervention or not? And for us, we all know that it's very hard to be sure on this because of poor descriptions. For instance, in our review on recidivism, it was sometimes very hard to especially understand what the control condition included. And this issue has another side, and that is that while exporting, transporting an intervention from one context to another one, we know that normally there are some kind of adaptation. And this adaptation might be severe or might not be severe, or might be very groundbreaking, or might be more easy. And for us who is not English spoken, we know that just translating a manual from English to Sweden is really not easy. And it comes to situations where you have to change the meaning or something like that. So it would be nice to hear if someone in the audience have ideas how to handle this situation, especially when it comes to adaptations. Should we consider intervention X as the same as in another context when we also can see that some adaptation has happened? That's my question.
It's a tough question, that, Knut, and I don't think we've got people queuing up to answer that at the moment. But I could imagine there being a whole other hour on that, actually.
Could be another webinar.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we should think about that. I mean, another one to look at that in a bit more detail. Oh, well, yeah, I think you've kind of stunned everyone there, Knut. So, I mean, were there any other points people wanted to raise or experiences people wanted to share? I've noticed in the chat a few people have dropped in a few references to work that others have done in this area that might be helpful. It's good to see that. No, we're kind of running out of energy at the end of the hour. I am just a couple of points that I wanted to make to round off. Then actually picking up something that Carl noted, that there is a working group as part of INSIA that's looking at a lot of these issues. So if they are things that kind of ring true to your work and you want to know more and you would like to kind of explore and discuss some of these issues more, there are groups to do that, and I'm just going to post in the chat. I've posted the website there, the web address, so people can go and have a look at the website and find out more about that working group and get in touch with Carl and join in others on that chat. And then I kind of, just as a finishing point for me, it was really interesting to hear these debates and kind of really challenging things that people are grappling with. And it's obvious that there are no clear answers, but you know, I kind of think some of those things about making searches as extensive as possible, and kind of some of those kind of quite subjective terms, particularly as Carl alluded to again, that we're working in times when people are expected to be ever more efficient and things like that, and this probably isn't going to go away, this kind of issue, and I would imagine it'd be things that people will continue to grapple with and a challenge. So I hope that the discussion today has been helpful for people. Thank you to Tina and Knut and Carl and Rigmor, and those of you that answered questions and contributed to the chat. It's been really helpful. As I said, we'll make sure this recording is uploaded to the website, the same website that's in the chat there. So if anyone wants to look back on it, or if anyone has further comments or thoughts, please do go to that INSIA website, and there'll be a way to get in touch with us via there. So thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you very much to our participants and everyone who's attended. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.